Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. And welcome to Monastery Live, where we hot dog grandstand and make general fools of ourselves for about 2 to 3 hours. I am, as always, your immaculate gaming monk, Mildra. And today with me, I have a bit of a special guest that was special enough that I had to do this one-on-one. So there will be no Master of the Flat Pack, no Living Stack of Comics, and none of Aaron's giant head this week. Unfortunately, we will be doing that next week. But with me is the one who needs more Ferrum, Iron Liz.
Hey, thanks for having me, Mildra.
By the way, the Ferrum joke that's possibly the worst thing I've come up with in the last month.
You know what? It's probably better than what I can do, so don't sweat it.
But then again, I am the person who when he sees a line of sodium, I have to do the Adam West Batman song.
See, I was thinking, was that the MST3K one? Sodium, sodium, sodium. That's a different one, I think.
It's because the symbol is Na. So.
Yeah. Okay, okay, gotcha. See, I was thinking of something else.
Yeah. And I've just broken my rule by explaining the joke. But first things first, the Geek of the Week. This time, the Geek of the Week award goes to Brandon K. Atten, who is a writer and editor at Palladium Games, whose remark was, quote, "We are looking to assemble some writing/creative teams in the relatively near future, and at this moment, I'm looking to include some more diverse talent as part of the core creatives. Nothing against cis white males, but this particular post is specifically asking about something we are missing in our core design teams. If you are a female/non-slish/PLC game designer, game writer, or artist, I would be interested in talking a little bit about some potential work as a freelance addition to some cool tabletop RPG projects we have in the works. Note, keep in mind that I'm just trying to gauge interest and get contact information at this point, and to get the conversation started. Good to know you've got your priorities in check after everybody wants your company's head on a plate for killing off Robotech. Again.
See, what they're really missing, it seems to be, is talent. And doing something blatantly illegal is like you. How is this any different, for example, to say, yeah, we're looking for game designers, but we don't want any black people. We're looking for a perspective that does not include blackness.
Let's play his game for a second. How is this any different than what the Alamo Draft House did when it came to Wonder Woman before an actual civil rights lawyer said, "Don't do this, you're going to get sued and you're going to lose."
Right. So what an asshole.
And because of the fact that he thought that this was a great idea and a great way to help assuage the anger that people have. Because now let me give a bit of background, a bit of perspective regarding why people want Kevin Simbeda's company's head on a stick.
Okay.
Do you remember the Kickstarter for Robotech Tactics?
I don't.
That was a Kickstarter that managed to get a fair bit of success. He was going to be working with a miniature manufacturing group called Ninja Division to handle the thing.
Okay.
And he got I think he got about $250,000 off of the Kickstarter. And they were going to be doing several waves because they hit some stretch goals. Wave 1 came out and it did all right. But then Wave 2 was announced. It's not coming. And the reason it's not coming, apparently, is because at the last fucking second, Simbeda told Ninja Division that he wanted these. And this happened, actually, I tell a lie. This happened at the last second before Wave 1 was set to be released. He told them to redo the models because he wanted them to use the kind of consistency that's in model airplanes. He wanted this for what was supposed to be articulated 30 millimeter miniatures. Basically, but I can't unsee somebody doing his comments in a Tommy Wiseau voice, which I would do, but I can't. I can't get that high up, and I don't feel like sucking helium in order for a bit. But because of that, a lot of people got really pissed off. Now, for me, this was just par for the course with Kevin Siembeta. He's got a history, but there were people who were actively considering filing a class action lawsuit against him.
Yeah, see, I'm waiting for it. I'm waiting for that straw that will break the camel's back when it comes to crowdfunding, because it just seems like it's completely ripe for fraud. So many people, like, notwithstanding some more famous or infamous examples, but the one that comes to mind, of course, is the Star Citizen, which
I knew that was coming, especially given recent news with the I honestly would not mind seeing that happen. Granted, Star Citizen is getting sued, but not for that reason. It's because Crytek is butthurt that they stopped using CryEngine and started using Lumberyard.
Oh God. Well, see, it's very quickly turning into the Duke Nukem Forever here, and it has no excuse as to why it is. It's like it's got millions and millions and millions of dollars. I don't know how they can't make it. So how is this not a scam? And how, this is at the point where you would expect some sort of governmental regulation agency to stick its nose in with that kind of money.
Yeah. And I do want to make something clear. I have nothing against crowdfunding as a whole. There's been plenty of really good games that I have supported that have come out through crowdfunding. But I do think that that some sort of leash needs to happen so that you don't have this endless loop. Now, granted, in the case of Star Citizen, there's nothing that Kickstarter themselves could really do because that goal has already been met as far as they're concerned.
Right, and they're not going to, largely because they're just getting paid off it. So, I don't know. In the end, if no regulation or anything or nobody touches it, it'll have the bubble effect where it'll pop, where people will see it as, oh, this is just a scam. Or just clamp down pretty hard on it, where they'll be very, very suspicious of future projects. But I don't know. I'm generally not in favor of regulating anything if it doesn't need to be. But
I'm not either. But I have my limits.
Where it's going, but yeah.
Although I suppose a better example, instead of Duke Nukem Forever, when it comes to what's happened with Star Citizen, is actually a movie, Heaven's Gate. Which it is impossible for me to summarize. If anybody wants the full details on that, go on YouTube and search Final Cut: The Making and Unmaking of Heaven's Gate. It is a phenomenal shit show. But this has been a sorry.
Well, I was going to say, this whole idea, too, by the way, of inserting identity politics into it is, if you're a business, it's stupid. It doesn't get you any money. So if you're trying to, and it's passively racist as well. So you're trying to suggest that, there's different categories of people have different experiences. And so therefore, since people are not the same, and that they apparently do have, women have these universal experiences, that somehow influence needs to come into the game. It's like, how bigoted is that? Just that, oh yeah, your woman thoughts will somehow change. Like, what are you talking about? Like, that's not viewing a person as a person.
Have you ever heard of a director named Norman Jewison?
I haven't.
And I told this story last week when I was railing on EN World, saying that 5th edition doesn't need an Oriental Adventures. Which my retort, to summarize my retort, was that yes, it does, but it doesn't need to be called Oriental Adventures.
Well, that's essentially what they're freaking out about. It's like, oh, that's an iffy word. We can't say that.
Well, the other thing they were freaking out about was that for the past 20 years with Legend of the Five Rings card tournaments, there has been a tradition of shouting bonsai for it. Of the winner shouting bonsai at the end when he's won the tournament, and this is a big deal because L5R's tournament scene basically did what basically has done for decades what Warhammer tried to do with the Storm of Chaos event and failed horribly.
Yeah,
because the Kotai series, and I'm not sure if Fantasy Flight Games is going to continue this tradition or not. What would happen is they would shoot the direction of the story, whether it be the Clan War, the Destroyer Incident, or the Search for Enlightenment. These arcs, the end solution would be semi-determined by who was winning the tournaments and what clans were winning out.
Sure,
but it was only at official sanctioned Kotai events. At specific stores that they would line out in their website.
Right.
And now I obviously was not. I didn't find out about the Storm of Chaos event until after it happened. But I don't think that Games Workshop was that hands-on about it.
Right. No, it's a good idea. I mean, having players play individual matches to kind of determine how chaos works and all that is a good idea in theory, but you have to realize too, I can only imagine how much infrastructure and resources Games Workshop has for, okay, what you write down is going to affect your next product line. It's going to affect unit sales and model molds and distribution, and all these other things where it's like leaving it up to the fans. Well, yeah, it's a kind of a cool idea is really not a smart move.
Yeah, I think Alderac was able to get away with it because all that was being managed was just a card game and an RPG.
Right.
But Games Workshop doing this sort of thing was not going to be the only way it could be feasible is if they set up like say an A, B, or C pre-plan. So if this faction wins, we'll go this route. If this faction wins, we'll go this route. Right. Setting up, not necessarily setting up the models, but doing early concept work and early illustrations and a few writings there. And then once the solution is come, okay, now we're going to work into that one. But they didn't have that kind of control, which is ironic given the amount of control that they put in other things.
Right, and given how Games Workshop can squeeze a nickel until it screams. I mean, that's the whole point with them, is to get as much money as they can possibly get away with. So I would think that they would know better a little bit,
Yeah. But I think the other problem was that was when you're doing this, you can't have a solution in mind.
Yeah.
Like they very clearly wanted to have it that chaos was winning out, and that's why. That's why when the end times happened. Fuck the end times. I consider the end times to be the year of butthurt, because I think their mindset was that they were so pissed that the Storm of Chaos thing didn't work out the way they wanted to. It's like, okay, now we're gonna really make it work out by flipping the goddamn table.
Yeah, and it was the whole point with that series is, it's near the edge, but it doesn't quite get there. And yeah, there are these catastrophes, but they don't quite do the world in yet. And so they basically just nuked the whole property from orbit, and it's like, forget it, I'm done. It was already an expensive hobby. When it came to the units for fantasy on the tabletop or in the war games, they changed the armies that I was interested in, the Wood Elves. They changed the style over pretty drastically. And it's like, I'm not going to buy a whole new set of models or rule sets or anything. Okay, fine, whatever. We're done. I guess you don't want this anymore. Okay, I guess I don't either.
Which is, it's for that reason that if they want to go with this whole route that there's nothing to be made from fantasy, then the obvious question is why revive role play and put it in the hands of Cubicle 7?
This is a quest for more money. See, this is them wanting to have their cake and eat it.
Well, and not only that, but allow them to not only that, but allow Cubicle 7 on their end of things to republish old modules. Like, one of the first things that they did was a digital re-release of the Enemy Within campaign.
Yeah, which was a good campaign, don't get me wrong, but that again was set in a different era of the series.
Yeah.
So part of the problem that I guess I see with this is, with Warhammer, if you know the way the story's going to go out, why play a past historical day, game where you overcome the bad guys, right? What's the point? In the end, it's not going to matter. I mean, it really takes the motivation to do anything out of a game.
This is one of those. This is admittedly, this is an issue that doesn't really have a solution, because this is also an issue with a lot of RPGs. Several of them in my own library that have a meta story.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a case of how can you work with that. Some games will intentionally give themselves what if scenarios.
Yeah.
Which certainly works a bit better. Other times it's more of everything leading up to this point, but we don't have we're not going to put in a specific solution in mind.
Yeah.
But
well, it's funny if I can interrupt a moment. This is kind of the reason why I actually enjoy Vampire the Requiem more than I like Vampire the Masquerade, because Masquerade has a large overarching central story, and that of course is the end times, Gehenna. So again, it's like you can see the world slipping off into chaos, and so yeah, there is kind of that. You can see the empire crumbling. New vampires are just too they're not potent enough, so it's going dark. Like, you can see that apocalyptic situation happening, but until you get to the apocalypse, like once the apocalypse happens, that's it, and it doesn't really mean anything. So what I liked about Requiem, though, is that it was much more of a, okay, you don't have all the answers, you can find more of the puzzle pieces, and a good GM can certainly spin that into a good story, but there really isn't a overarching story to dwarf everything else, and especially not, okay, this is regardless of whatever political maneuverings you have in a city, or fighting werewolf monstrosities, or hunting ghosts, it doesn't matter because the world's going to end. So what's the point, But there isn't anything like that in Requiem. You have much more of a little bit more control over what you want to do, and they have arcs with it, which I think is one of the reasons people didn't like it quite so much as they did. And it was so different. But yeah, I see that side of gaming, and that appeals to me much more.
Mm-hmm.
So,
once I should note that with White Wolf, one thing I should have covered, but for some reason I forgot to, was that a few years ago, the White Wolf stuff was bought by Paradox, who also recently acquired Harebrained Schemes.
They certainly did. Harebrained did the new BattleTech game.
Well, they did that. They also did the Shadowrun trilogy, Returns, Dragonfall, and Hong Kong, which are pretty good games. Right. They also did an interesting miniatures game that got them an Origins Award called Golem Arcana.
I like Paradox as a company. I think they're pretty solid. They're getting up into the middle tier companies, but they don't abuse DLC like other companies do, and they certainly get their mileage, and they're very meticulous for what they do. So I guess I'm more positive with them than I am with Fantasy Flight, which is more of a, okay, we're just going to take everything and turn it into a board game that's pretty simple and basic to go with. And
I've had a long deal with Fantasy Flight games, and I do understand where you're coming from when it came to Warhammer Third.
Oh God,
I had I took the plunge on it myself because much like with fourth edition, it'd be very easy for me to just write it off and say that it sucks. But that is not how I work. I have to dig in and figure out why I think this way. Like unfortunately because of that, I ended up reading through the entirety of Fatal.
Oh God. Why though?
Because I kept hearing stories about this game that was supposedly the worst thing that ever happened, and I had thought, oh no, every game has got its good points. No game can be that bad,
right? Well, see, the thing with Fatal is it's one of those things that I think started off as trolling, and then the people. Okay, so
no, I do not believe. I have seen Byron Hall's rebuttal. I do not believe that was trolling. I think he's nuts.
Well, that's just it too, where it's like, okay, so Fatal is this horrible game where you can basically do whatever depraved action you want to do. And so the question I have to ask is, why in a social setting would you want to say, I want to rape a child, for example, and I want to have rules to do that, or I want to, cut somebody's tongue out, or like, okay, you can certainly do something that's gripping or for story license reasons, but playing it out seems really strange to me, and especially doing it in a social setting seems also very odd. Because again, I mean, I'm not a Puritan or anything like that. I know that people do, whatever they do in their private life or whatever, and they have secret fantasies or whatever. There's a difference between fantasy and reality, and a sane person wouldn't share something that dark with another. So it seems like it's. I guess I just can't wrap my head around on what the point of it is.
I have settled on the point of Byron Hall, the creator of the game. Supposedly there was an editor, but I like to imagine that it's just Byron Hall with a pseudonym, because the idea that somebody else wanted to contribute to this,
right,
is a thought too depressing to consider. But when Jason Sarton and Darren McLennan did their lengthy review of the game, he wrote out a rebuttal and managed to creep out everybody. And not in the fun way, but in the I feel like I'm reading the diary of a crazy person kind of way.
Sure.
So that's why I do not believe that it was
right,
trolling.
that it was all just messing with you. Yeah. No, it's Fatal was written during a different age too, because I was discussing this with my boyfriend. It's like, how is it that these odd fandoms sort of ballooned, right? You have furry communities, sure, but you have all these other like Headspace. I'm a multiple system, and these, I think I'm a video game character, whatever. And it seems to be that like the internet gives you the opportunity to congregate, because if you didn't have that anonymity and you were just trying to do this in real life, it would be very difficult to find other people outside of that, the realm of you're not physically talking to that person and describing this and they know who you are and whatever. Like even with a magazine advert or things like that, that would be hard to do. So it's like Fatal was one of those games that it was like that, where it's like, okay, I want to see how many other weird people are out there to sort of share this with, maybe. But yeah, now you have the internet, so I'm not sure. I don't even know where I'm going with this, but you know what I'm saying?
I do think I get where you're going with this, and I do think that when it came to that game, I think if Sarton and McLennan hadn't covered it, notobody would have heard about it. Same with
Right.
other things like Wraith Thulu or Spawn of Fashan, or other cases. I think it's the same reason that everybody knows about the ET video game.
Yeah. Or it has its own sense of notoriety to it.
At the same time, if the room wasn't given so much attention, do you really think people would be going to showings cosplaying as certain characters?
Oh, of course not. Yeah.
And for what it's worth, I have met Tommy Wiseau at one of these, and the way he acts in that movie and the way he acts in real life are one and the same.
Yeah, no, I don't doubt that. I mean, he was dead serious about that. Oh, it's a good movie. I want to have a.
He insisted that it was a
vision.
black comedy.
Yeah, he had a vision, and he put his heart and soul into that vision, as flawed as it was. And he only came out later to say, "Oh yeah, no, this is totally a joke, right?" Yeah, no, he meant that to be exactly the way it was.
Yep.
Which, yeah, it sounds like that's exactly the same situation with Fatal. So
yeah, although if somebody wants an example of an actual troll job when it comes to tabletop RPGs, that honor goes to Hackmaster. that was specifically designed to be one giant parody of AD&D.
Yeah.
The problem is they did too good of a job and people started playing it unironically.
Yeah, wasn't Hackmaster made fun of with Knights of the Dinner Table or something?
It was made by the Knights of the Dinner Table crew as a way to poke fun at AD&D.
Yep.
And most recently it got added to it. It had its most recent version had a brief spot at Bundle of Holding. Its Bundle of Holding is basically it's like Humble Bundle, except they only do certain batches at a certain amount of time, but they focus on tabletop RPGs. They did one of the more recent ones they did was Feng Shui 2, which I bought.
Okay.
Even though I already have Feng Shui, I did as a kind of I bought it and then I gave the PDFs to a few friends. And because of that, you can get some pretty good deals on that kind of stuff.
Sure. As you do.
But out of curiosity, what would you say was the first tabletop RPG that you played?
First one was AD&D. So I was 9 years old, and my brother got the Dragon Strike board game, and so we, pulled out all the boards on it, and I'm like, "Whoa, that's kind of cool!" And he had a friend from he was in 5th grade, and there's a friend who had this even better game, and it was but you can't tell anybody because it might be bad, but it's called Dungeons and Dragons, and so. Because that was around the Satanic Panic area.
Yeah, I know. It's just there's one ridiculous story that always comes to mind with the Satanic Panic, but I'll save that for later.
But so we ended up getting it, and the first character I made, that was back with AD&D. It was the Black Books by that point, so a little bit more streamlined, a little bit better than the previous incarnations of it. But you rolled the dice, and whatever 3d6 fell, that was what your stat was, and you did that in order, and that was your character. So I ended up making a fighter. But yeah, no, that was the first one. We didn't really know what we were doing half the time, but I got really into D&D. That was kind of the first start for me. But I was 9 years old when I started playing.
I don't remember what age I was. I know I was very young. I did start with the Black Books. Mm-hmm. I still have them. As well as a version of the original Red Box.
I know they re-released it, but
yeah, this version that I have still has the still has the membership application for RPGA.
Oh God. Yes, the Role Players Association.
Which I never joined and I never will because one, I did even back then I didn't like people telling me what to do without reason, and two, I know that if I joined RPGA now, you would see my giant ass in the news because at some game store somewhere I'd end up causing another fight.
Well, see, keep in mind too with some of these, with Dragon Magazine, for example, they had games by mail, so it was literally like chess by mail, except it was tabletop. So part of that organization was to set people up who are willing to do that. And I remember, back maybe in 2003, there was a game store in downtown St. Paul that was going out of business, and so it had a lot of just stuff that it was selling, and so it was selling like sealed copies of Dragon Magazine, some of them all the way back to the late 70s, and so they're a quarter a piece. So I bought a box of these things, and looking through them, you see those same adverts where it's like, oh, we have to get this gaming group together, we'll send a letter out, and it's almost like a chain letter. So get people to join up, and we can all, hear the. Doing anything by mail seems crazy to me. So, but doing that over with a game with multiple people, where you'd send out multiple letters, that's a whole new level of commitment that I don't think you'd see again.
Although, one thing that I kind of miss from Dragon Magazine was Ask the Sage, because sometimes he would get interesting questions, like and I know what this is a reference to, but there would be a few times where somebody would ask, "Do barbarians eat quiche?"
Real men don't eat quiche. Yeah.
Yeah, or when Expedition to the Barrier Peaks came out, somebody asked, does a shield spell stop laser fire? And the answer was no. God. And just those sort of things, or could somebody or could an evil sorcerer be in a relationship with a good wizard? And I remember somebody sharing with me that one, and with a note that said, "I'm a traditionalist. I believe in Adam and Eve, not Adam and Evil Lynn."
I get it.
Well, somebody has to. I've been using that joke for years.
Yeah.
But with D&D, there has been one thing that's always kind of annoyed me, and I hinted at this in the past, and I've done a few things here and there, but D&D has always had this fear of committing to having a core campaign setting, where it wants to have its cake and eat it too for the longest time, because it's like they don't want to have a campaign setting because they want people to kind of fill in those blanks on their own.
Right.
But at the same time, they have meta. They have these micro stories that they reference, basically everything but a campaign setting proper.
They have characters, like sample character. Like in 3rd edition, they had Lida and Hennet and Mealy and, these sample characters. And I think at one point in time, and I don't know because I never followed up on it, but I thought they had books written about them.
They might have, but that was probably during that time when Lorraine Williams was in charge.
Mm.
And Lorraine Williams is not well liked at all.
Yeah. So it seems like they kept wanting to try to create just sort of like a base setting to do this stuff with base characters to kind of have stories about or missions or things like that.
Yeah. White Wolf also did this with both Exalted and Scion, where they had a set of mascot characters that you would see throughout flavor text. Except those games could get away with it because Exalted had a default campaign setting, in fact, a very detailed one that I very much enjoyed.
Yeah.
Scion didn't have a campaign setting per se, but because of how heavily it relied on Mythos, you basically had everything but that. Plus, Scion could get away with that kind of thing because it's taking place in modern times.
Sure. Yeah, and Modern Times has its own stories, its own plot arcs and hooks and things like that.
But I've heard, and I'll take this with a grain of salt, but I've heard that at one point they tried to do that early on with second edition by integrating it with Forgotten Realms. Not the one you're familiar with, the second edition version of it.
Okay.
But nobody liked that. So they didn't do that again.
Yeah.
And ironically, as in a move of going full circle, 5th edition is trying to do that exact thing.
See, 5th edition seems very, very divisive. So I think it's an okay system. It sort of combines a lot of things together. Personally, I prefer it over 4th edition, which was like playing a video game. It was like playing World of Warcraft.
Okay, you mind me being a little controversial here?
Go right ahead.
I do not like 5th edition. And I actually even though I don't run it, I have more respect for 4th edition than I do for 5th.
Just in the way that 4th edition took risks, whereas 5th edition didn't, or
okay. Well, this is unfortunately going to require a bit of backstory.
Okay.
I could probably make a backstory counter on this, or just have a drop of the too late gag. But I was at Gen Con when 4th edition was announced.
Okay.
So I've had a very intimate view of its rise and fall, and I argued that the point where it truly did become baby's first RPG, and the point that was, in hindsight, the canary in the coal mine, was when the Essentials line was released.
Ah, okay.
But here's whenever somebody blasts me for the fact that I will willingly run 4th edition, one thing I have to make clear is there is no critique that anyone short of Rob Heinsoe can say about 4th edition that I haven't heard a billion times already. Like Rob Heinsoe, Jonathan Tweet, those are the only kind of people who can say something I haven't already heard.
Sure. And
the WoW thing, I don't see it. I honestly treat it as in the same vein as when somebody when I can tell when somebody who's talking about how much Call of Duty sucks and yet by the way they're talking about it, it's clear that they're not talking about Call of Duty per se. They're just using that as an impression of a straw man.
Yeah.
Because 4th edition came out right around the time that Wrath of the Lich King came out for WoW.
Yep.
And WoW, and at that point, at its ubiquitousness, and
WoW was king at that point.
Yeah, and in my not so humble opinion, Wrath of the Lich King was the peak.
I could see that. Yeah. No.
To quote Lord Guru, it's all downhill from there. And to be honest, I predicted what was going to happen because I saw what was happening with how the Death Knights work, and I said they are going to paint themselves into a corner in less than 5 years.
Right.
Because you had some classes that were single role only, and some classes that could do multiple roles at once.
Yeah, like the Paladin.
Paladin's actually one of the bigger examples, but but for the single roles, they didn't have anything to balance that out. And this was going to come to a head, and it eventually did. And their solution was to completely pussy out by
Yeah.
just nuking the skill tree setup and going with that talent setup that they've had since Mists of Pandaria, which is a shame because Mists of Pandaria might have brought me back because it had a class that is my gimmick.
Oh.
I'm Mildred the monk. What did you?
Okay. Yeah. No. I think I guess I have to disagree with you. So fourth edition for me, I saw it as okay. Dungeons and Dragons has to compete against computer games, and computer games are becoming much more sophisticated at that point. So tabletop the main selling advantage for tabletop is that you can do whatever you want to do in it. So it's only limited by your imagination. So if you want to, fight a zombie pirate ship or things like that, you can totally do that in tabletop. But when it comes to computer games or board games or any sort of thing, you're limited by what the creators came up with. World of Warcraft was starting to break that mold. It had all sorts of crazy stuff in it. It didn't have the base building yet, but it had some really good stories. It had a lot of adventuring and discovering things. And like Dungeons and Dragons, it was party based. So you had character roles. You had the healer, you had the tank, you had the DPS, and you had the magic casters who would throw spells or debuffs out. Well, that was mimicked in the gameplay pretty heavily, where previous to that system, Dungeons and Dragons felt much more almost litigious. It felt like little details and you're moving little pieces around. So, this sword will do this number of dice rolls and damage, and you have to get that against a number, and when you get to you don't get blooded, you don't have the ability to just sort of self-heal or have second wins or things like that. It was more everybody had their roles, sure, but it was much more okay, piece by piece by piece. Fourth edition comes out and says, okay, yeah, if you want to deal damage and throw spells, and we're going to simplify this down, we're going to get rid of alignment, which was always one of D&D's dicier points.
I will make it clear right now. I never liked what alignment became because I felt they put a round peg in a square hole.
Right. And so, I looked at the rule books, and the rule books were predominantly about skills and ability charts, and there wasn't as much story or, I guess, fluff. Everybody uses that word, but I don't think it's a good word. But yeah, with Forgotten Realms, it became much more about these are the movers and the shakers, and these are their stats. And don't get me wrong, there was certainly that going on with previous incarnations of the game, but it also seemed more story driven, and it also seemed much more, it seemed like a different mindset. So if World of Warcraft hadn't been such an influencer, I think the game for certain would not have come out the way it did.
Yep. To be honest, if there was one sort of thing I think it was trying to compete with, it would probably be the games that were on the rise in the independent tabletop scene. One of the big rising stars, and is still fairly popular nowadays, was Savage Worlds.
Yes.
Which was just starting to get some momentum, and there was also the rise of prominent indie stuff, since this was when Drive-Thru RPG was just starting to get its foothold.
That's true.
And when I look at that, and then I look at what happened when I had a conversation with I've had conversations with Rob Heinsoe, as well as it was Jay something. I can't remember his last name, but he was the guy who was responsible for Warhammer Fantasy 3rd edition, and then moved on to the Star Wars trilogy of games, and now known as the Genesis system.
Yeah.
And when it came to Jay, I asked what some of his influences, and he brought up several independent games, including My Life with Master. And that that led me to believe that that was where people were looking at. Especially but the reason now, in a bit of self promotion, I will admit, I did a video a few months ago called "A Defense and Critique of Fourth Edition," and because even with the WoW issues, there were things that it did that were genuine improvements. I very much liked how it handled multi-classing, which is something that was always an issue.
Yes.
There's also the fact that even though it was a follow-up to D&D 3rd edition, chronologically speaking, it was a successor to Star Wars Saga Edition, and a lot of Saga Edition's ideas were carried over into 4th. The main one being how skill training worked. That was something that was implemented in Saga Edition first. But the reason why I've held it in higher regard. The first reason that I hold 4th in higher regard is that they very much had a clear goal of what they wanted to do and were uncompromising in that. It's just that, and this is ultimately a problem that D&D was eventually going to have. D&D has tried to be the everyman's fantasy, and unfortunately, that is going to have its problems. Like if I want to run a low fantasy style game, if I want to run, say, Berserk, essentially, I have to do a lot of house ruling in order to make 3rd edition work for me. To the point where I remember statting up Guts at one point as an NPC, and I had to go through like 2 or 3 different variants of Barbarian in order to make it work. And even then, I still wasn't satisfied with how it came out.
Right.
And this ties back into that whole thing of D&D not wanting to commit to whether it wants to be a campaign setting or just be broad fantasy with a degree of modularity. That'll be a thing in a minute. But I have a even if it sucks, I will always have a bit of respect when somebody who's creative has a specific thing that they're trying to do, and everything that they do is in service to that goal.
Sure.
The other reason is when it comes, the original version of 5th edition that I saw was actually something that I would have considered worthy enough to actually put down money for, and that was D&D Next. I was one of the play testers for that.
Oh, cool.
It was an interesting experience because there were several really cool ideas that D&D Next had that I did feel was trying to create a middle ground and be the edition uniter I was promised. Because that is how they sold me, that the next D&D would be a uniting of the editions. Now, I had run through it plenty of times, but as time went on, I started to notice a problem. It was like they were taking anything that wasn't classic enough and running away screaming. One of the big things, and this is one case that I often bring up, is how the maneuver system worked in Next versus how it worked in 5th. Now, in Next, every martial-based class, or every non-mage class, and even some casting classes would have what was referred to as a pool of maneuver dice. That would start out with just 1, and you'd get more as you'd level up. So fighters had it, barbarians had it, rogues had it, monks had it, paladins had it, and so on.
Right.
There were 3 ways you could use this dice. You could either roll it along with your attack or damage roll. You could roll it to give yourself a one-time boost to AC, or you could spend it on doing a maneuver. And each of those martial classes would have a different pool of maneuvers that they could pick from, kind of like their own little spell list.
Sure.
Things like Bull Rush, Flurry of Blows, Cleave, etc. were considered maneuvers. I remember cleave was that for each additional enemy within melee range that you wanted to target, you would spend 1 maneuver dice. And the thing is, this wasn't like spells where this would recharge after a full rest. They were like lands in Magic, where you would regain them at the start of your next turn.
Okay.
It added a great layer to actually making martial-based characters interesting and giving them tactical options. And I really, really liked it.
Well, yeah, no, every person who's played Next said they enjoyed it, and they said it was the best. And don't get me wrong, I don't hate 4th edition. I've had some really good fun times with it. My point is just that it was very different, and I think the reasons for its creation were to compete with its contemporaries.
Yeah, it could have been. I have not spoken to Heinzo, and I damn sure I'm not speaking to Merles, especially since Merles, I have said at one point, if he walked into a room full of actual game designers, he'd be whistling "Stranger in Paradise." And there's the fact that I called him a jock sniffer after he decided to put up that infamous tweet a few months back.
Yeah,
because that is the vibe I've always gotten from the way he acts to what other people have told me is that he's basically the office stooge.
Okay.
But since one of those sources also was notorious for screaming at Monty Cook over a decade ago, take these with a grain of salt.
Yeah.
Although the reason he screamed at Monty Cook was because of this was when Monty Cook had that ivory tower design idea for 3rd edition.
Yeah.
Where I believe his words were, player system mastery should be rewarded and system ignorance should be punished.
Ugh.
He's since gone on record saying he regrets taking that approach, and his more recent stuff with Numenera, the Strange, and the Cipher system does not have that issue.
Well, nobody likes rules lawyering anyway, so.
Rules lawyering is one of those things that at one of my old tables is punishable by the pane glass. It is a shot glass full of vodka, salt, Tabasco sauce, Tiger sauce, Frank's Red Hot sauce, and pepper.
That sounds like a glorified brush fire, which is Tabasco and tequila. But yeah, no, it's...
Well, the choice is either that or drinking a bottle of bacon soda. It is exactly what you think it is.
Yeah.
I keep that stuff around just in case somebody says that it can't get any worse.
Right.
Because I chugged that thing down and it was the worst thing I ever had. Well, except for that fireball, that was fucking disgusting.
So just on 2000, or excuse me, was it 2014 that 5th Ed came out?
I think it was. And getting back to the maneuver thing, they took that idea and reduced it to a fighter subtype.
Oh.
There's also, and when I do have a review of 5th edition. One thing that I did put out is that with some of the things they tried to bring in from 4th, they missed the point. Like having second wind be a fighter exclusive feature, which I thought missed. The reason why healing surges and second wind were implemented was to ease the burden off of the cleric, so the cleric didn't have to be the heal bot.
Sure.
That was the reason that they were given, and having that be a specific thing for this one class, having it that feats, which yes, in 3rd edition, feats could get overcomplicated really quickly.
Mm-hmm.
There's no denying that. But what they did with fifth by having feats be an alternate version of ability score improvement, so you could feasibly only take 4 feats in a full adventuring career.
Yeah.
Was missing the point of why feats were introduced to begin with, which was to personalize the class. Because something that a lot of people, both in tabletop and in video games, don't seem to get is that customization, whether it be min-maxing or doing it legit, is a very effective way with connecting the player with the character.
Oh, definitely.
It's the reason why I will freely admit that games like Dear Esther and other similar art games have been my punching bag. And this is not some new thing because of social justice. No, they've been my punching bag because of the whole line of, if you'll forgive me for making a Seinfeld meme, and this offends you as a Jewish person? No, it offends me as a comedian. But it's that for all their talk of how they want to introduce more story into games, they ignore how game mechanics can be used to tell story.
Right, which is by itself, that takes some sort of effort to do, though. So it's much, if you have for example, like a warlock class, and they use demons or things like that for the source of their power, then okay, yeah, you've got a story arc. Or, phylacteries, there has to be, some kind of fancy gemstone, and there's a very, somebody wants that, or, it's things like that. Yeah, absolutely. You can make good stories, but it does require a little bit more thinking than somebody hires you to go and kill something.
I do remember once somebody asking, why does the phylactery always have to be this gross thing or this stone that they have on this person? Can't we do a phylactery that's not so obvious? I thought, okay. So I decided to implement that for a campaign, and the plot twist was that the phylactery was the city itself.
See, that's kind of clever, but how would you make a whole city the phylactery, though?
A lot of runes, a lot of blood, and a lot of time.
I suppose.
Before, in this particular villain's case, before he became a lich, he was an elf, so he had a lot of free time. It took him about 150 years to set it up, but he finally did.
No, that makes sense.
It also added a bit of interest because it meant that the city itself was literally against them, as in you could go wandering down an alley and then all of a sudden you get crushed by the walls.
Right, and that could be its own, that by itself is a cool setting because you can introduce a strange, horrific, supernatural feel to it, and like the city has a soul of its own. And yeah, that's a great idea. It's definitely unique in that regard.
I agree with Derek Alexander when he said that what makes horror games work is that you're in a place you don't want to be. But I think the overall problem that I had when I should note that D&D Next handled feats a bit more traditionally, but one thing that they did that I very much approved of was templates.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that I wanted, and I could see them trying to struggle with doing in fourth, was trying to reduce the hurdle when it came to optimization.
Yes.
And that is
but that's part of the fun, though, is to people to get mildly autistic or mildly autistic about trying to figure out the best balance of things.
Well, there is certainly that, and there is certainly a fun factor in that, but it should not be. But
sure, it shouldn't be the focus of the game.
Leveling up should be a good thing, not a case of nail biting. Oh God, what if this feat screws me?
Right. What if this balance doesn't work fully? Or yeah.
And that's also the reason why I believe that any game that has a leveling system should allow for retraining.
Yeah.
Just period.
Otherwise, people are making new characters. It's like, and that drives me up the wall.
Mm-hmm.
I hate it when players decide, oh, I don't like this character. I want to make a new one.
I think the only time this has actually worked was Darkness Rising, aka the real D&D movie, where you have a bar where, since the bard kept getting himself killed because he's a bard,
Yeah.
he asked, "Hey, can I bring in a new character?" He's like, "Okay," and he had his employees make 50 copies of the same character, which played out into one of the final battles when their caster had said, "If I cast that thing, I'm going to be a sitting duck. Hide behind the mound of dead bards." But you can easily find that movie if you look around. I highly recommend it, even if it is that low budget amateurishness.
Sure.
It very much understands what it's dealing with. Um, but fifth reducing feats to that sort of thing, and basically if you go with that, you can't do the ability score improvement. I understand the need to make things a little more to make things a little more approachable, but you can swing too far the other way. And hell, even with as Wowish or the like as Fourth did, it didn't abandon that kind of thing.
True.
But the the light at the end of the tunnel regarding it is that Heinso, after he left Wizards, teamed up with Jonathan Tweet and made the actual Edition Uniter I was asking for with 13th Age, which, in my opinion, is a much superior game. Mostly because they don't have to rely on the traditions. They're a lot more free, and they actually did a few things that was a case of such brilliance that I was surprised nobody else thought of it. One of them being the flexible attacks that several classes have. In fact, that's one of the main draws with, say, the fighter. The flexible attack setup is basically that there are certain effects that you can utilize that will be active depending on the die roll itself, i.e., whether or not you roll above 15 or whether or not your roll is even or odd.
Okay.
And because of that, it places the degree of importance on what number you end up getting, not just whether or not you get high or low.
Right. Okay. Okay. I'm following you.
I think one of my favorite abilities that was in that was carve an opening. So what would basically happen is you could activate it if you rolled a hit but you didn't crit. Your crit range would increase by 1, and this would stack every time you didn't crit until you did, and then it would reset.
Okay. Which is kind of clever.
What they did with bards also was a stroke of brilliance by giving them their own mechanics and having them feel a lot more unique. Because there were two things that they had access to. One of them was the flexible attacks, and the other which took the form of battle cries for them. But instead of boosting their own attacks, it would allow them to buff people who were within close range.
Okay.
There's also the fact that even they reduced the max level down to 10, but each level matters. I think they have battle cries, and then they have spells or songs instead of the usual approach.
And it's like a buff that keeps it going, or is it like a skill set?
But as far as battle cries,
yeah.
Well, it's usually it can be a temporary buff that that because of they work on the whole flexible attack. What you roll depends on how it works.
Okay.
A good example would be Stay Strong, which triggers on a natural 16 plus. And it doesn't increase it doesn't increase damage, but what it does is give a nearby ally a +2 bonus to AC until your next turn.
Okay.
As far as songs go, they are songs are basically can be their spells, although they can take more traditional spells as well. But because of that, it allows them to have their own identity instead of being stuck in the middle of two because, well, early D&D was not very good at trying to hybridize some of their early classes.
Right. Especially, yeah, multi-classes was one of those things that was one of the big handicaps, because you would always you'd essentially end up with two weaker versions of one class. So
yeah,
just didn't work as effectively.
In fact, I think the only game I have that uses D&D's framework that managed to make multi-classing work is the Legend system. And that's the only case where multi-classing is actively encouraged because of how their track system works. Since every class in that game has 3 tracks, and some of those tracks have their own subtypes. Like a barbarian has the Path of War, the Path of Rage, and the Path of Ancestors, and you'll either gain them at a slow, medium, or fast rate.
Okay.
Every starting character can swap out one of these tracks for one with another class, or one of the single tracks, like say knights or combat alchemists, for free. You can, if you further want to customize, you can take a feat called Guild Initiation, which allows you to switch again.
Okay.
Or if you are more concerned with class powers and less about magic items, you can choose to have your character be a full buy-in type, which gives you a second medium track but reduces the rate of magic item slots that you get.
Okay. So it's an interesting way to customize but also tailoring your character both in story and ability. That's not bad at all.
There's been some I've seen some crazy builds, and I've used some crazy builds with it, like having a ranger who instead of using a bow and arrow goes full gun kata out of equilibrium. There's also
Sure.
a few classes there's also a few tracks that they outright admitted are shamelessly ripping off things, like the just blade track for the sage is basically a Jedi. They did not, and when somebody brought that up, they said yeah, it is, and we're not trying to hide it.
Right.
There was the implication that somebody could feasibly use the weapon tag system that they made to do a rocket punch. Like if a Warforged did that with a ranged melee weapon, that they said, yeah, you can do, yeah, that'll work. We will completely allow that. But just with the point is that there are alternatives.
Sure, there's better ways to do multi-classing, and there's better ways to connect it to a story, because especially with D&D, it was you were penalizing yourself by multi-classing, so people very rarely did.
Even though they insisted on putting a prestige class in every single book.
Yeah, yeah. Well, prestige classes with I never was that impressed with them. I mean, they certainly had benefits, at least within third edition, though. Like for example, wizards. It made much more sense to become a 20th level wizard than it did to become a 10th level lore master. I mean, sure, you got some extra abilities, but wizards were by far, more powerful.
And if anything, Pathfinder made this problem even worse by giving a dedication bonus.
Exactly. So it makes more sense to stay in one class to get those maximum abilities than it does to get into a prestige or even another class and get lesser abilities. So yeah, at 20th level, people are 20th level, but you're at 10th level effectively.
Yep. My favorite, I've mentioned this before, but my personal favorite, and in my opinion the peak when it comes to this sort of thing, to the point where I couldn't do Pathfinder because the former impressed me too much, is the craft duology, Spycraft 2.0 and Fantasy Craft.
Okay.
Because now when it comes to multi-classing, the reason why is because they are the most modular D20 I have seen. In fact, with Fantasy Craft's setup, not only could you feasibly do a low magic campaign, they give you options and advice on doing it.
Okay.
There's an entire chapter in the GM section about what to do if you wanted to run high, low, or what they call Gonzo fantasy, which is basically stuff like manga or wuxia style fantasy stuff.
Mm-hmm.
There's also a rule for the GMs known as campaign qualities, which can either make things easier, harder when it comes to the mechanics and advancement. And with some classes, the campaign quality is needed. Like you can't have a cleric if the campaign does not have the miracles quality. You can't have a mage if the sorcery quality isn't there.
Yeah, which makes sense.
They also completely cleaned up the feat system. You remember how every feat in expansions needed to be listed whether or not they count as a bonus feat for fighters?
Yes.
Fantasy Craft does not have that problem because all the feats are specifically categorized to begin with.
Feats definitely was okay. So I'm thinking third edition here. So the third edition feats, okay, they started out fairly basic, and you see this with games in general, is that later incarnations of feats though become much more powerful and more beneficial. So
yeah, the power creep issue.
Yeah, so feats became less about, okay, well, here's a nice little tweak that I can do or give myself an extra ability to, okay, based on how you manage those feats, your character is going to be significantly different or more powerful. So having a few extra skill points in, some of the feats like artistic or something will give you a couple points in skills, but that's not nearly as good as either the combat feats or other the willpower or things to give you better resistances. I mean having too much in later incarnations, as well as not having it balanced between skills are nice but resistances are better. Combat skills are better than than skills on average. Your fighter is not going to be doing many skill checks anyway. So it did encourage over specialization for people as well based on their feats. And so, that's where you like you said, you're freaking out about what the most optimum build is. So,
but
fixing that was a major thing to do.
Yeah. In the case of Fantasy Craft, all of the feats are categorized as either basic combat, melee combat, ranged combat, unarmed combat, skill, chance, which are luck based feats, style feats, which are social stuff, and gear.
Okay.
Where this factors in is, let me grab one example so I know I'm not talking out of my ass or making another scrub like I did last week. Okay. And even before you pick a class, there's already a fair bit of customization. There isn't a fighter class in Fantasycraft. The closest equivalent is the soldier class, so we'll go with that.
Mm-hmm.
One of their class abilities is fight on. So at every even level, you can gain one additional basic, melee, ranged, or unarmed combat feat, or 2 additional proficiencies.
It's not bad.
So it clearly tells that. And the other part where they fixed feats is they made feat chains a lot clearer. The 95% of the feat chains in Fantasycraft rely on a 3-tier structure: basics, mastery, supremacy.
Mm-hmm.
That every one of those things will give more than one benefit. It's not a case of, oh, this does this one thing and that's it. Getting a new feat can very much change how you approach a situation.
Sure. They
also gave a bunch of the feats were designed specifically for different weapons. And there's been a few that I've made myself over the years. Cleave became one example of this 3-tier setup. So the first time around, for Cleave Basics works like Cleave does. Cleave Mastery increases your threat range against mooks, referred to as standard characters. Basically 4th edition's minions, where they're one-hit KOs.
Okay.
So Cleave Mastery gives you a better threat range against them.
Okay.
And it reduces and it gets rid of the only once limit that Cleave Basics has. Cleave Supremacy. It's a lot cheaper to activate melee criticals, and when you do kill or knock out an opponent, you can take a 5-foot step before making the additional attack.
Right.
So it kind of builds up on that, but it has a lot more use. Some feats will grant stances or special attacks. Because something that I've always been a proponent of is giving non-mages something interesting to do. My test is that if a game is having me do the standard fighter where I'm doing nothing but basic attack, fail.
Well, is it? Well, yeah, I guess it depends.
That is a bit extreme.
It's a bit harsh, yeah. But I mean, I think personally, and this kind of goes into the various reasons as to why people play games. If all the characters are doing is a simple auto attack and that's all they're really contributing, chances are that player's not having fun. So yeah. For me, it's about getting that player into the story then. If combat's not doing it for them, or they're not trying to, swashbuckle or anything like that, yeah, then the story's supposed to pick that up. If the mechanics can't do that, then that's where the story comes in.
Yeah.
So certainly, yeah, if a system really only has your one type of character doing one role, then I don't think that's a good thing. And unless that character is flashy and has choices between that one thing, one basic attack, then yeah, like you said, it's not, that is a failure.
Mm-hmm. And
so yeah, you can say what you will about 4th Ed, but at least each character had options for what they did.
Well, that and 4th Ed actually made some good strides into making 2-weapon combat something that was not a nightmare to deal with.
Oh God, yes. Oh, 3rd edition too. So yeah, figuring out 2-weapon combat in 3rd edition, and then having multiple attacks. That was so much fun to figure each one of those out.
Well,
especially if they got multi-class too. They need to know what the hell you were doing.
Yeah, I will freely admit that if somebody wanted, especially when the D20 bubble happened, I demanded that anyone who's going to be using some stuff out from expansion books or like cite everything.
Yeah.
Even if it's just something you grab from Giant in the Playground or one of the various Peach forums. Cite it so I can see it, so I know you're not just pulling this out of your ass, because if you do, then there is a slipper that is going to be very well acquainted with someone's back.
Right. And the problem with D20 is that they added rules to friggin' everything, and there were books upon books upon books. So if you wanted
I'll be honest, I will take that over the chart hell from Rollmaster.
That's true. I mean, flow charts is not something that goes well in games. It's just not helping.
Rollmaster was a trailblazer with being the first to do the critical hit tables, but other people have done it better.
Yeah.
Stuff like Warhammer and Riddle of Steel being among them.
Yes, and the Warhammer critical hits. Yeah, critical hit was a big deal, and it was a game ender when you got one. So, but that also plays into the style of game itself. So, Dungeons and Dragons is not simulationist based.
No,
it's not trying to have any sort of, and it doesn't. It's more to that. Yeah, we're all going to be your Lord of the Rings fantasy stuff. But
the Tolkien melting pot is what I've often called it.
Yeah. Whereas Warhammer, it's the economy is much more. Chances are you're a peasant and you're living a difficult life, and you literally have character classes who are just tradesmen. Like I can make something, and that is still a valuable and useful thing. But yeah, a critical hit was, okay, yeah, you're going to lob the person's head off and that's it. Or even if it's low on the table, you still do lasting damage where they're out of the fight. So I guess with critical hits is that they should be punchy enough where in D&D with the combat stuff, if they did come up, people were either hitting because they knew how to stack the deck in their favor, where they were hitting all the time, or it was, people who were never in combat, never got that benefit of getting one. So, yeah.
Well, I'm not one to talk about ridiculous critting because I have done that with a build that I had in the past, because I remember when somebody had this long screed about how the gunblade in Final Fantasy VIII was unrealistic, and I said,
sure.
And I said, you know what? I'm going to run with this.
You actually tried to make that work.
Not only did we make it work, we expanded upon it to the point where I was wielding a Nodachi whose handle was akin to a bolt action shotgun.
Oh God.
And as if to validate me, then years later, I ended up discovering Tenra Bansho Zero, a Japanese tabletop that did the gunblade thing with its own little twist. Because in that case, you weren't firing traditional bullets per se.
Okay.
The ammunition was known as Scarlet Steel or Auriculum, and it would have magical energy hyper compressed into a small sphere the size of a marble. And when you pulled the trigger, you crushed the thing, and the energy that was within it goes through the blade.
Okay.
One of the signature weapons was the Zact 8, which was effectively a repurposed version of a short sword that would be used with mech that was designed to be utilized by a human. It's just that it's a Monster Hunter style greatsword instead of just a short sword.
Okay.
It was called the Zact 8 because you could fire full blast from the thing up to 8 times.
Okay.
But there's way but the thing is that I've never believed in the idea of something can't work.
Sure.
If it,
Yeah.
it
If you're clever enough, yeah, no. And certainly there are entire settings that are designed to break that statement, like with the orcs in 40K. It's like they believe it'll work, so therefore it works. So.
Yeah. Red goes faster because they believe red will go faster.
Right. So, I mean, even if it's tech or more simulationist based, yeah, you can configure it, but whether or not it fits in the game setting itself is entirely to be seen. So,
although I think part of it is a side effect of the fact that a lot of people when they view fantasy, they are viewing that Tolkien melting pot as if everything has to be in the sense as if we're in Britain,
right? And elves and dwarves, and there's usually empires of a previous age that are fallen, and that's a very common trope as well as the old empire.
Yeah, so. And a lot of the I've mentioned this before, but a lot of people put too much stock into certain traditions that D&D has had, because a lot of it just comes from things that Gygax and Arneson were fans of,
right?
Namely Tolkien's work, Howard's work, and Moorcock's work.
Yeah.
The law and chaos thing with the alignment system that comes from the Gods of Law and Chaos thing that Moorcock had with his books.
Okay.
And in that regard, it makes sense. I'd say the only people who seem to get it as far as how that was meant to work is the people behind the Shin Megami Tensei games.
Okay.
Because while law and chaos are significant alignments, they put them on a spectrum, usually within the context of the two major factions, the Gaia and Messiah cults.
Okay.
Whereas the Messiah cults represent order, but the extreme end of it, they want complete and total fascism.
Right.
Whereas the Gaia cults represent chaos and are a lot more independent, but their extreme is complete anarchy.
Mm-hmm.
But they don't attach a good evil part to it.
Sure. And, no, I'm following you.
Fantasycraft, for what it's worth, doesn't even use that system. Instead, they treat alignments as an alignment to a specific. They treat it as an alignment to a specific deity. So, if you were making a character in converting Forgotten Realms to Fantasycraft, and you were making, say, a Paladin of Soon, your alignment would be Soon.
Okay. Sure, because it follows her faith.
Yeah. Instead of your alignment being lawful good or something to that extent.
Right. And
furthermore, each of the deities has a few things to note. There is the whole domain thing, but they put a little more attention into it, because for starters, a given deity in Fantasycraft will have a set of skills that are associated with them, whether it be tactics, crafting a specific within a specific subtype, etc. And if you're playing a divine class, those classes are treated as class skills for you.
Sure.
There's usually about 2 to 5 of them. The second thing is a ritual weapon. This being a weapon or something to that extent that's always associated with that deity. So if you have a deity of the harvest and say the ritual weapon is a scythe, you are treated as, even if you don't have the proper proficiency, which proficiency is another thing they simplified, you are always treated as having proficiency with a scythe in that case. It's been a while since I delved into Forgotten Realms' cosmology, so I can't recall what Soon's equivalent would be.
Excuse me, I think she's a whip. But yeah, I hear what you're saying.
And lastly, instead of domains and doing the whole domain spell thing, because FC does not discriminate between arcane and divine magic, it's just one combined spell list. What you have instead are a series of paths, which are a set of class features. And these would usually be decided in advance by the GM. But for a divine class, like say a like say a priest, which is this game's equivalent to the cleric. Let's see, at first level and every odd level after that, you can take one step along an alignment's paths. These will be a set of 5 class features that gradually move up in scale, and a lot of them follow the same kind of naming setup as the domains that you might see in D&D. So you have a path of beasts, you have a path of blood, a path of chaos, a path of fire, etc.
Sure.
So, and I think the reason, one of the reasons I ended up preferring this setup is that it gives a distinction between arcane and divine characters, because aside from the fact that the cleric for D&D for the longest time has been a goddamn Mary Sue. Don't hate because I tell the truth. Yeah,
I can see that. I would think that a cleric wouldn't have martial capability, but yeah, they do.
Well, I think some clerics I can definitely see that, but the whole issue is them being able to do so many things to the point where they became an almost necessity, and then Godzilla happened.
Well, clerics generally are, though. I mean, as far as healers go, your next best step is a bard, and nobody's going to rely on a bard to heal.
But they make very good meat shields.
So you say that, but I always made bard characters that were not, front and center. But
I know I'm half joking. Plus, I read one too many issues of a little D&D comic strip called Life of the Party.
Okay.
Which gave the line that I entitled every Diablo player in a nutshell. I spent 5 hours wasting 3 healing potions in 3 dungeons, and all I got out of it was a weapon my class can't even use.
Yep.
That is anybody who's ever done any sort of roguelike or any Diablo game knows the struggle.
Oh yeah. So let me ask you this then, to switch gears here. You've been so you showed a picture of like the Star Wars West End book that I signed ages ago.
Yeah, and I'm looking at it. It's right in front of me on my shelf right now.
Right. So out of all the Star Wars games that exist out there, which is your favorite? Because you already know which mine is.
Okay. Now, first things first. Not to put myself over and give myself a shameless plug, but I did a retrospective of the Star Wars RPG line.
Yep.
And the funny thing is, if somebody was to ask me to run Star Wars D6, that version isn't technically the one I would be using.
Okay.
The one I would be using is the quote, is the unofficial third edition.
Okay. Well, go ahead.
Because there was a version there was an expanded version of the revised and expanded version.
Yes.
That was, and if you listen close, you can hear somebody blowing the Inception horn. That's not me, I swear. But the thing of it is that version has a lot of the same stuff in Star Wars D6, but it also adds a lot more stuff. And one of the things it adds specifically that I very much enjoy is putting in a system for the lightsaber forms.
Okay. That would be a useful thing to add in. Definitely.
And I know some people argue where you have the lightsaber combat power in the actual book. Isn't that the same thing? No. Somebody who uses one form and not all of the forms are the same. In fact, they are anything but.
Right.
Yoda used form 4. Count Dooku used form 2. Yes, both of them were swinging.
It's sacrilegious in general that Yoda even picked up a lightsaber, but that's besides the point. But yeah, I hear what you're saying. So,
well, if I can't use Yoda, I'll use Darth Vader instead. He used form 5, known as either Xian or Gemso. Count Dooku used form 2, which is known as Makashi, which is basically the fencer's form. Form 5 is equivalent to Kendo or broadsword fighting.
Okay.
Because instead of trying to dodge attacks, you're trying to match strength with strength.
Well, then I take it then you obviously played games where Jedi were more of a thing.
Yeah, I have. I've done because I've won because even with Jedi supposedly being an alpha class, I do think that if you take the right approach, you can utilize them. And I have to thank the Old Republic's existence because that gave me a lot more license to use things. Not the Knights of the Old Republic. I need to be clear on that. Not the
Vigi game.
Well, there's I know some people don't like it, but I have a soft spot for some of the Star Wars comics that Dark Horse put out.
Oh no, are those the oh god, like the Savast Quais fuck. The one with the Dark Sun. What's it?
They put out a lot.
Yeah. No, there's some really good ones out there. I will admit to that. I was actually looking for some of the old Dark Sun criminal books with like those comic books that inspired the Nintendo 64 game and that sort of thing with Dash Rendar and that whole series. So no, those are good.
Although mentioning Star Wars video would not be complete if I did not bring up one of the greatest mods ever to Jedi Academy, Movie Battles 2, which is what gave me the glory that is how to lightsaber. Is Movie Battles 2 is basically a multiplayer mod of Jedi Academy.
Okay.
And has its own class set up to the point where even though you can pick a Jedi, it is not auto win. Because yes, a lightsaber is a one-hit kill.
Yeah.
There's just one problem. You actually have to hit them.
Okay.
Somebody who's using ranged weapons who knows what they're doing can still kick your ass.
Sure.
But that's gonna be the case with any kind of game. Somebody who may have bought a fancy golden gun can still get their ass kicked. But as far as the tabletop games, when I did that retrospective, I had said that I don't, aside from the first Star Wars D20, which I blew to bits, especially with how that version probably because of things they didn't think through, probably had the most OP Jedi in any of the games.
Yeah.
Mostly because of the fact that they managed to fuck up a good idea with The idea of having AC be turned into defense and have armor just give you damage reduction is a good idea on its own.
Sure.
The problem, the unfortunate problem is that lightsabers ignore DR, and if a Jedi is using them at the mid-teens, they're doing more. They're doing just as, if not more, damage than a goddamn rocket launcher.
Yeah, and I get it. I mean, Jedi are supposed to be powerful. They're supposed to be, they're supposed to have the whole story revolve around them, but that makes it, there's a power imbalance that happens very quickly. And
for what it's worth, I remember that Ralph Koster, when he was working on Star Wars Galaxies, outright said he did not want Jedi in that game. That was something that SOE insisted on.
Now, there was a great game that sadly got destroyed. Oh, Galaxies. Anyway.
Yep. Well, but in my personal opinion, since that leaves Genesis, D6, and Saga.
Okay.
I think that where each of them has strengths, they also have weaknesses that are addressed by the other ones. The closest to a middle ground is Genesis, which I do realize is a hard sell because it uses symbol dice, and that being a hard sell is nothing new. I had a hard time getting people to try out Fudge, and all that had was just plus and minus D6s. Although Fudge is still a really good game. It's just that symbol dice are going to be a hard sell no matter what.
Yeah, I don't like them either. So
I understand. I just but I can't take that. I can't just dismiss that because that breaks my own rules.
Okay.
If somebody is more concerned with narrative over mechanics, then I would advise them to go for D6. If they prefer crunch and being able to customize their character and their abilities more directly, then go for Saga. If they want a little of both, go with Genesis.
Okay. That's a well-rounded response.
I do, however, think that that a lot of people, because of how the first D20 attempt sucked, which I found out something interesting when I was doing my research. So that version came out less than a year after D&D 3rd came out, which started to make a lot of my issues make sense.
And it was carbon copy. Like it was the D6 system. They just sort of pasted, I don't know if they play tested very much of it.
I don't think they even had. I don't even think they had enough time. And the other thing that was of note was the fact that the reason why it didn't last long is because they had a limit on how many books they could put out from Lucasfilm. And they were making more money from the miniatures game books than they were from D20.
Yeah, from tabletop. Yeah.
I've seen in a way what I've referred to as D20 revised, because I'm not being paid by the syllable, was a kind
of anyway.
Was a kind of I credit my influences, and I wear them on my sleeve. Don't judge me. God damn it!
I totally wrecked your train of thought. Sorry.
Yes, you did. This is all your fault. Now put your head down in shame.
Yeah.
But I think that revised was the cocoon that would later become the butterfly known as D20 Modern. Because I could see a lot of the I could see a lot of early ideas that would later be in D20 Modern,
Yeah.
although and some of them would integrate stuff that was pioneered with Saga Edition. But there were a few interesting things that I did take from Revised.
Okay.
Namely, the whole idea that instead of doing the whole force point thing, that force points could tire you out through the whole vitality system.
Hmm.
I did like that idea, but Slayer's D20 did it better. Because in that case, they didn't have the whole spells per day thing. It's a case that casting a spell caused subdual damage to yourself
Okay.
that would eventually tire you out if you kept trying to blow through your spells.
Yeah. Okay. No, probably a better mechanic in some way because yeah,
Um,
elaborate skill lists or spell lists rather is was certainly one of the downsides. And yeah, no, that's not a bad idea.
well, there's also the fact that when Slayer's D20 did their spell setups, they had it that each of the different schools of spellcasting were their own skill check, which is something that I wholeheartedly approve of. um, maybe it's because, well, L5R is one of my favorite RPGs, and you can't just fire and forget your spells in that.
Yeah.
But the other thing that it did do was the other thing that I liked was how the force feats were improvements on force powers. Like you could get a force power in order to move objects, but the force feat could allow you to move multiple objects at once.
Okay. Sure.
That kind of thing.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But those were really the only things I was able to take from D20 Revised. Saga Edition they didn't use the same setup for for force powers, but they did something that I thought was a lot better.
Oh, go ahead.
Especially since because of how first off, one of the smart things that they did was this was the introduction of treating the saving throws as defenses. And in Saga Edition's case, they removed AC. Instead they integrated attacks that would normally target AC into Fortitude, which also allowed them to introduce the condition track.
Okay.
Which was a good way to speed up combat, because if you took a certain amount of damage, you would have to roll Fortitude.
Mm-hmm.
And if you failed, you would take one step on the condition track and take a gradual penalty, going from 1, 2, 5, 10, and incapacitated.
Okay.
What it allowed for is that even somebody who had a high amount of HP could still get dropped.
Sure.
With the proper tactics.
Which makes sense. I mean, that's...
But,
well, yeah, one of the better ways that you could actually drop a person without going through HP was like poison and, status effects that would affect their... Yeah.
Interesting thing with Saga Edition is that even at the end, they only really ever had 5 classes. What they expanded upon was was adding new talent trees that classes could have.
Okay.
And have you ever run D20 Modern?
I haven't. No, I had the book for it once, and we were planning to, but we never did.
Well, the setup that was used here, and actually I tell a slight lie. They only had they had prestige. They did have prestige classes, but they only had 5 core classes.
Okay.
And even with the prestige classes, they didn't really go all out with it.
Okay. Well, we've been going for almost 2 hours,
Yeah.
so it's almost 11 where I'm at. So, is there anything else we might want to touch on, or anything like that, or?
But I will finish where I was going. It's that
Sure.
with instead, what would happen is that every other level you could get a talent.
Okay.
And the and the talents would be along various trees that run a certain theme. Like, say, if you were playing a scoundrel, some of the talent trees that would eventually be available would say, if you want to be somebody who is a good pilot, you would take something off of the spacer talent tree.
Right.
If you wanted to do the whole dual wielding that the Fets do, you would probably take something off the run and gun talent tree.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how those kind of went. And they not a lot of them had very elaborate requirements. It was more of, like in the case of Endless Space, more of pick what you want to pick.
Mm-hmm.
That's how the only real problem that I ever had with Saga Edition was the expansions were a little bit unfocused, where they would add things to just about everything instead of having very specific books. Like in Pathfinder, if you're buying Ultimate Combat, you know what you're getting.
Sure.
5th edition has this problem as well with the few expansions it's brought up, but I've touched on that. There is also so because of that, an optimized character might be referencing way too many books at once. There was also the matter that as it was going on, they were Wizards was gearing up to release 4th edition, so they're putting all their eggs in that basket.
Right. So it's less developed, or less, tweaked by comparison.
Mm-hmm. But I do think Saga Edition is the unsung hero, because that one doesn't get a whole lot of credit.
Yeah, no, I've heard good things about Saga. It's the problem is that if you do end up buying new book sets, it can be spendy, and then chances are I'm not going to end up playing the game with people anyway. So
I get a lot of my stuff through PDFs.
I know I probably should, and it's certainly a lot less expensive to do it that way, but I'm old school. I like having books. Part of it is my own weird obsession with it, but yeah, it's nice to have a physical copy. So,
which I can understand.
I will make exceptions though for just to play a game to play it, or with 5th edition there was a PDF that I got for that, but again, that's I'm not expecting to go into it, whole hog for 5th ed. So
since I support a lot of indie titles, I unfortunately don't have that luxury, and I don't. And doing some games will do print on demand, but that's really a dice roll.
Well, yeah, indies certainly. Then you got to go PDF.
Yeah, I had to with Legend, even though I had to with Legend, and I had to with a recent game I acquired called Strike, which is another case of basically being successors to 4th edition without its problems.
Okay.
And Heroes Against Darkness, aside from being the first game I ever reviewed, is another case of PDF only that also does the edition uniter thing so much better.
Okay.
But I make it a habit to try and always keep looking around to see, okay, what cool shit is out there that I don't know is cool shit yet.
Well, you certainly, yeah, you know your stuff, and you've got your ear to the ground with it. So if nothing else, I mean, you're probably better suited than I am in that regard. So props to you.
Is this one of those cases of the student has surpassed the teacher?
No, I've become the master. Well, yeah, no, indie games, I would, it's definitely the best stuff is coming out in indie, but there's so much garbage with it that it's, yeah, there's a lot of junk to sort through.
There have been a few people whose blogs have been instrumental when it comes to finding indies or just interesting games. One of them is the Philippine gamer. I think his name is J. Stephen Ariong. He's created a couple of games himself. One of them being a wushu open style game called Badass, which is about exactly what you'd think it would be about.
Yeah.
Home style cooking.
Sure. Yeah, and car mechanics and open heart surgery.
Yeah. Well, somebody wanted a game about car mechanics. I just pointed them over to Car Wars. The free RPG blog is another one. That's how I found out about JAGS, or Just Another Gaming System. And sometimes I'll find some weird stuff I didn't even know I'd like just by going on the TG board on 4chan or 8chan.
Oh, really? Okay.
Well, I think one of the best examples that showed me that TG is on their shit was when somebody pitched the idea of hey, why don't we make an Evangelion RPG?
Oh God.
And then years later we get Adeptus Evangelion, which took the rule set from Dark Heresy and mixed it with Eva.
Oh God.
Emo, and here's the thing, it fucking works. One recent case that I found through them was Ops and Tactics, which is basically if somebody wanted to do a better D20 modern that had a lot more emphasis on firearms.
Okay. Yeah.
But the meme is
modern did not do firearms well.
Yeah, the meme is TG gets shit done. There was also the fact that aside from TG having a pretty competent dice roller, that was where I got the line of what would happen if a orc found a copy of Hot Rocks in a vehicle that he stole. Next thing you know, I have somebody writing the lyrics to "I Can't Get No Satisfaction" as if they were sung by an orc.
Nice.
But there's been a few attempts to try and make Magic: The Gathering into a tabletop RPG, but it hasn't gone through. The ultimate expression of TG, though, is Dungeons the Dragoning 40,000 edition. This is what happens when somebody decides to take D&D, World of Darkness, Exalted, 7th Sea, and Warhammer Fantasy, and roll them all into one.
Okay.
But here's the best part. It works.
Oh God. Well, throw enough at the wall, it'll stick.
But
if they put the work into it, more power to them.
Yeah, it uses the dice system from 7th Sea /L5R, some classes and other motifs from Exalted, the career system from Warhammer.
Ooh.
Although each career has its own little linear track, and mixes all these things together and somehow makes it work. I've run full campaigns with this thing.
Nice. Well, I think it's about time for me to head to bed here pretty quick here. But yeah, it
Yeah,
was
I
a
think.
great chance to speak with you on this. It's kind of nice to hear the various games, and you, yeah, like I said, you know your stuff,
Mhm.
frontwards and backwards. So,
Yep. Anything you want to plug?
well, I do live stream every Tuesdays and Thursdays at 8:30 Eastern Standard Time, where I talk about pretty much whatever the chat wants to talk about and what it's like to live in Curacao.
Mhm.
So yeah, just feel free to stop on by or follow me on Twitter at Iron Liz. So
Also, Word of Blake is a bunch of filthy heretics.
yes, they are.
Um,
Purge the unbelievers. Although Comstar is they're no angels either. So
devil you know versus the one you don't.
right.
Um, I now I will note the following from my end. On Wednesday, over on RVT, I'm continuing my adventures of torturing my players through Legend of the Five Rings, since they've learned the hard way that L5R's combat does not fuck around. They got into a mass combat situation, and even though they won, they all but one of them was knocked unconscious.
Oh God.
Um, well, if you want an if you want an instance of how brutal it can get, remember the Babylon Project?
Yes.
That bad. Maybe not that
Oh
crunchy,
God.
but that bad.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, don't get me started on another tangent.
on Thursday. No, it's not Thursday around here. It is Thursday.
Donderdag.
I am running. I will of course be a guest on Lord Nurgle's stream of corruption,
Oh, sounds fun.
where we go through where we the lost in the dam go through the bullshit of the week and argue incessantly along with Routes, the angriest man in the universe. And on Friday, hopefully, we will be continuing on with the Pathfinder game that is being run by Routes, and who, as I said before, is he is the man who has stormed the beaches of Normandy, fought the Crusades, and is too angry to die.
So he's the Doom Marine.
Yeah, you're not. Hell is not locked in. Hell is not locked in a room with the Doom Marine. The Doom Marine is locked in hell with them.
Yeah.
And I'm gonna stop myself there before I go on a tangent of how awesome Mick Gordon's editing is.
All right. Well, I guess I'll just drop here. But yeah, again, it was a pleasure to chat with you. So.
All right, stop by anytime, Liz. This has been a hell of a lot of fun.
So glad to hear it. Well, take care.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
And as for the rest, as they say, my name is Mildra, and on behalf of Iron Liz and myself and the rest of the madness, stay frosty, everybody.